discoveries come from. One analysis found that 2/3 of the 21 drugs with the highest therapeutic impact approved between 1965 and 1992 stemmed directly from discoveries made through publicly funded research. Dr. Kesselheim, you found in a recent study that most of our truly transformative drugs are based on insights gained through publicly funded research, something you've summarized in your testimony here today. But a 2001 Health Affairs study found that is often cited by the drug industry found that 91% of drug patents are owned by the private sector, and the industry says this is evidence that innovation comes straight from the drug companies. So, Dr. Kesselheim, I just want you to help us understand the discrepancy in these two descriptions of where innovation comes from.
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of explanations as to why it is that that health affairs study might have found that. First of all, as I said in my comments, a lot of the key insights, such as the use of tumor necrosis factor blockers to treat rheumatologic disease, that really then inspire a whole field of therapeutics, are not necessarily patentable insights, but nonetheless arise from decades, in the case of the VEGF inhibitors and Avastin story, decades of government-funded research that is usually conducted in government laboratories or in the academic center, and those kinds of key insights that then catalyze the subsequent development of products are not patentable, although the products then are. On the other hand, pharmaceutical companies do an excellent job of trying to build a patent thicket around their inventions, and then will subsequently patent incremental changes and incremental innovations, and so will build we did one study showing over 200 patents around one particular drug. So I think that on the one hand, it's the case that a lot of the key innovations that come from public money are not patentable. On the other hand, it's the case that pharmaceutical companies pursue patents to excess. We did a study looking at all of these patents that are held in the healthcare sector, and found that the very small sliver of patents that were held by academic institutions and government were actually much more important in terms of being cited more in subsequent patents, and had much more impact on the field in terms of their generalizability and value than the patents on average that were held by the pharmaceutical sector.
So the federal government invests a lot of money in research. The drug companies then use that research to develop new drugs, and then when those drugs earn money, sometimes billions of dollars, the taxpayers don't necessarily reap the reward. That's how I'm hearing you describe this chain. Now, some drug companies argue that the government recoups its investment in basic research because the drug companies pay corporate taxes on their profits. Do you believe that the taxpayers are being adequately compensated for their investment in the drug companies, Dr. Kesselheim?
Well, I mean, I think that we could do a lot more to try to invest some of the positive profits and outcomes that come from these products into the into the biomedical enterprise specifically. When you look at pharmaceutical manufacturers and you look at how much money they devote to research and development, only 20% of pharmaceutical manufacturers' sales are devoted to research and development. The amount that they spend on administration and advertising is actually far more, and then the amount that they spend on actual innovative research and development is far less than that, on the level of less than 5%. So I think that what we need to be doing is considering ways of taking some of the enormous profits that emerge from the pharmaceutical industry and plowing them back into the biomedical enterprise that in many cases provided the underlying discoveries that allowed those profits to be made.
Well, in fact, though, I think there's much conversation about going in the opposite direction with drug company profits. Perhaps I could get you involved in this, Dr. Mazzucato. There's a lot of talk now about cutting corporate taxes for companies that can trace their profits back to patents or other forms of intellectual property. So I want to know what you think about this sort of innovation box tax cut. Would it spur innovation or increase federal investments in research? Dr. Mazzucato, do you have a point of view about this?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important that we remember what a patent is. And a patent is a monopoly for 20 years, right? So as a policymaker, the goal should not be to increase, the profits of companies. It should be actually to increase the research, if you want, that leads to those patents, right? This is what policymakers are trying to do all around the world. And the evidence is that these patent box or innovation box type policies are not very good at that, because what they're targeting is the income generated from the patents rather than the research that leads to them. This is also true, by the way, of lots of R&D tax credits, which end up being designed very poorly. In Holland, they've just designed one which is actually quite intelligent, I think, because it's targeting the research that leads to the R&D, so the labor hired, again, rather than the income generated from that R&D. But I think we should also remember that, for example, the Bayh-Dole Act, which in 1980 allowed publicly funded research to be patented, if you actually read that act, it's really interesting. I mean, they also say we better make sure that the taxpayer doesn't pay twice, right? So just last year, I think the NIH spent around 31 billion in research, both basic and applied. And the problem is, what happens to also the prices of these drugs? Do they reflect that sort of input, right? And so it's not only, and I've been actually writing a lot about this, how we might get some sort of plowback measures, but even the pricing mechanism itself could be one way that the taxpayer could be rewarded, precisely so they don't pay twice. But the government has never felt the confidence, if you want, to exercise that right to cap the prices of drugs, precisely because of this wrong narrative that I was talking about before, where this idea that you're meddling in the market when actually you've created that market. You've just given us so much evidence where this kind of financing has actually shaped the healthcare industry, the actual drugs that are purchased. But as soon as we talk about government having a say on the price, or even the whole Obamacare, if you want, vision, where we are, hear about the government meddling in the healthcare industry. And so this is why we need a new narrative.
So what I'm hearing you say, if I just boil this down a little bit, is that we get more innovation if we plow more into basic research, if we do more federal support for basic research, not if we make these giveaways to big drug companies.
No, there's no evidence. So the patent box, which has been tried and tested in places, like the UK, there's no evidence that increases investment in innovation. It might increase time that people golf. I don't know. That might happen. That could be tested as well. But what drives investments in innovation by the private sector are their perceptions of where the future technological and market opportunities are. By the way, Warren Buffett is very good on this.
Good.
And then I think what we're talking about is what actually drives those future opportunities. And that's what we should be talking about. That's what policymakers should be thinking about, actually financing those opportunities, because that's what drives private sector investment.
And so I'm just going to do one more question, then hand it over to the congressman. And that is then to ask about the impact of something like my Medical Innovation Act, which could boost the NIH budget by about 20%, without adding new taxes, without adding to the deficit, by asking the drug companies to put a little more of their profits into NIH. No surprise, the army of lobbyists that work for the biggest drug companies don't like this bill. But Dr. Kesselheim, could I ask you how the Medical Innovation Act might affect the pipeline of new products and affect the drug industry itself?
Well, I think that the Medical Innovation Act is a good idea because it will, it provides a very substantial sum to the NIH for its work in catalyzing transformative drug development, and to the FDA for its work in supporting regulatory science to make sure drugs are evaluated and approved so that we know that they work and are safe before they can come on the market. So I think that unfortunately, the amount of money that pharmaceutical companies have made over false advertising and other problems that they've had that has led to a substantial amount of money that they could be contributing back into the development economy through this Medical Innovation Act.
Well, I thank you very much. And it's clear from the testimony we've heard today that new drugs are built on a foundation of taxpayer-supported investments in basic research. It does not make sense to me that Congress says that it wants more innovation and then turns around and cuts the budgets for NIH, for NSF, for our basic research. It is time for lawmakers to put their money where their mouth is. I think that the Medical Innovation Act is one way that we can help get back on the right track. So thank you all. Congressman Cummings?